This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
It's my pleasure now to introduce to you our first plenary speaker, Edward O. Wilson. How do you introduce the world's foremost living biologist? Been thinking about this. I could probably just say, introducing E.O. Wilson, and you would all know something about the man that we've asked to launch this summit. If you're an ecologist, you'd probably think of island biogeography. If you're an evolutionary biologist, you'd probably think about sociobiology. If you're a conservation biologist, you'd think biodiversity. And if you're an entomologist, well, I think you'd think ants. Ed Wilson made seminal contributions to these scientific disciplines and, at the same time, wrote books that captivated the general public. Two of his books won Pulitzer Prizes for nonfiction, The Ants and On Human Nature. But The Naturalist might be my favorite, and it's a must-read for any young scientist. Professor Wilson has received more than 100 awards, including the U.S. National Medal of Science and the Crayford Prize of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. I decided to skip the other 98 in hopes that we could move on and actually hear from Professor Wilson. Now he uses his E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation to foster stewardship of our world through biodiversity research and education. But you probably knew all of that. What you may not have known is that this is Professor Wilson's first visit to Berkeley since the early 1970s. And when I timidly approached him to ask him to be the lead speaker of the summit, well, he replied that he enthusiastically accepted our invitation to what he called this historic event because it encapsulated his life's work. To talk about his life's work today, setting aside half the world for the rest of life, I give you Professor E.O. Wilson.
I'm going to remain seated, not out of disrespect to this wonderful audience, but because my knees are getting a little wobbly. Professor Beisinger, Steve, comrades, friends, the future, members of the future of the planet, thank you for having me here. This is a historic event that we're having this week. I'm grateful to be allowed to be part of it. I'm going to begin by summarizing what scientists have learned about biodiversity and extinction, especially during the past 20 years of fast-moving research. Then I'll suggest what I believe is the only viable solution to staunch the continuing high and growing rate of species extinction around the world. And finally, I'll make the point that I believe is already obvious to those of you here gathered who have any experience or have acquired information on our present biodiversity, the status of our present biodiversity, that our national parks, our parks generally, but especially our national parks in this country, are logical centers for both scientific research and education, for many domains of science, but especially and critically for biodiversity and conservation of the living part of the environment. Now, the world is turning green, pastel green, but humanity's focus remains on the physical environment. You may have noted on pollution, shortage of fresh water, especially here in California. I wish you the best for the next 5 years. The shrinkage of arable land, and on that great wrathful demon, climate change. In contrast, Earth's biodiversity and the wildlands in which biodiversity is concentrated have continued to receive relatively little attention. This is a huge strategic mistake. Consider then what I would like to have as a kind of mantra or rule to sum this up about humanity's environmental responsibility. If we save the living environment of Earth, we'll also save the physical non-living environment because each depends intimately on the other. But if we save only the physical environment, which we seem worldwide bent to doing, we're going to lose them both. So, what is the condition of the living environment, in particular its diversity and stability? How are we handling this critical element of Earth's sustainability and our own future as a species? Let me summarize the basic information in a time that, in fact, I hope I will be able to say it in a fairly short period of time. The scientists have assembled to the present moment, much of it published only during the past 10 years. First, what is biodiversity? That will be, Professor Beisinger tells me on the final exam. What is biodiversity? It's the collectivity of all inherited variation in any given place you select to sample that can be delimited, whether a vacant lot in a city, an island in the Pacific, or the entire planet. Biodiversity, as many of you will of course know, consists of 3 levels. An ecosystem such as a pond, a forest patch, a coral reef, and then next down in the hierarchy that compose biodiversity are the species composing each ecosystem, and finally, at the base, the genes that prescribe the traits that define the species that compose the living part of the ecosystems. Now, how many species are known in the whole world? How much biodiversity is there? At the present time, almost exactly 2 million are known. How many are there actually out there, known and unknown? Excluding bacteria and the archaea, the 2 prokaryotic microorganisms I like to call the dark matter of biology, because so little is known about them. And let me give students advice. It won't even be for entomology, but for the bigger subject, that if you're picking a group to work on and where your expertise will move you fastest, then be a microbiologist. At any rate, so little is known of that part of biodiversity. We'll include them. The best estimate of biodiversity, of the amount of biodiversity in the remainder, that is the fungi, algae, plants, and animals, is about 8 to 10 million species, give or take, or a million. Think about that. In other words, a little over 250 years since Linnaeus began the process of exploring the biodiversity of the world and introduced the binomial system of binomial nomenclature, we still have somewhere in the vicinity of something like 80% of the species remaining to be discovered, not including the prokaryotes. Except for the big mammals, the vertebrates, comprising 63,000 known species collectively of mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians, plus about 270,000 species of flowering plants known globally, very little to nothing is known of the remaining millions of kinds of fungi, algae, and invertebrates. These are the foundation of the biosphere. They are also the most neglected little things that run the earth for us. To put the whole matter in a nutshell, we live on a little known planet. We have only begun, basically, the Linnaean enterprise of exploring the biodiversity of the world. At the present rate of elementary exploration, that is, diagnosing, finding, diagnosing, and giving a defining Latin name, at the present rate, which is about 18,000 new species described a year, new species, biologists will complete a census of the world's biodiversity sometime in the 23rd century. That has to be speeded up dramatically, otherwise we are going to be flying almost completely blind in the finer and farther reaches of conservation biology and practice. Complete censuses have been undertaken to the present time in only 3 national parks in the world of which I am aware: the Great Smokies Mountain National Park, the Boston Harbor National Park and Recreation Area, and the one with I've been closely defined over the last few years, or affiliated, the Gorongosa National Park of Mozambique. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most advanced, with 50,000 hours of field work by experts and by assistants completed. About 18,000 species have been recorded as living there, and with a rough estimate of 40,000 to 60,000 species considered likely, when all of the transients, all of the very rare and not yet discovered species, and all those unfound and or not found and undescribed have been registered. Fewer than 1%, let me repeat that, fewer than 1% of that, and that would be a typical census for a national park, of the species have been studied beyond this first roll call, getting their name on the list. Incidentally, to include something very dear to me, the largest amount of biodiversity by far in a North American park is, or would be, the one under consideration for the Mobile, Alabama Delta, and the Red Hills and the rivers immediately to its north. It harbors, for example, and we're quite along in advance, and I'm from that part of the country, far along in advancing the proposal for it. It harbors, for example, 24 species of oaks. Now, 14 species have been found in the southern Appalachians, which are generally considered, or have been up to this time, the headquarters of oak biodiversity in North America. They have 24 there, and on and on. In fact, with the adjacent central Gulf Coast plains, that park, if created, would have the largest number of turtle species in the world. It is rivaled only by the Mekong Delta, and so on. Fishes into the hundreds of species. Now, turning next to the extinction rate. What is the extinction rate globally? With the data sets of the best known vertebrate animal species, and with additional information from paleontology and genetics, we can put the extinction rate now occurring to the closest power of 10, that is order of magnitude, 1,000 times greater than the extinction rate that existed before the coming of humans, closest to 1,000 times. For example, from 1895 to 2006, 57 freshwater fish species and distinct geographic subspecies were driven to extinction in the United States by human activity. These extinctions have removed approximately 10% of the total species alive in North America. This means that the rate of fish species has been calculated as just under an estimated 900 times the level of species extinction, rate of species extinction, before the coming of humans. This brings us then to the effectiveness of the global conservation movement, a great contribution to world culture pioneered by the United States. The global conservation movement has aroused public awareness. It has stimulated a great deal of research. But what has it accomplished in saving species, hence biodiversity? Now, this is something you should know when you're challenged by your Republican friends. Are anyone present? Okay, anyway, I know I'm at Berkeley. Anyway, the answer, what has it actually accomplished? We need to have the numbers. How well are we doing? The answer from data on the vertebrates, we know enough about the vertebrates to actually derive something like this, is that the global conservation movement has slowed the rate of species extinction, but is still nowhere close to stopping it. A study made by experts on different groups of land vertebrates, species by species analysis, found that the rate in these most favored groups, notice I didn't include the freshwater fish, these are land vertebrates, has been cut by 1/5, according to group, to 1/5 to 1/2 by conservation efforts worldwide. Furthermore, the Endangered Species Act, pardon me, by focusing on recognized endangered vertebrates in the United States, since they are armed with legal procedures and with actions designed for each species in turn, has brought 10 times more species back to health that have come under the Endangered Species Act, 10 times more than have been lost to extinction. But they are, our American species are a very elite group, and have therefore, we've done better, especially in the case of the birds, where worldwide the rate of extinction has brought through, it's been successful by about 50%. Nevertheless, the species, and with them, the whole of biodiversity, continues to hemorrhage. The prospects for the rest of this century are grim for the living environment. Everyone here, as I'm sure, knows about the 2C threshold. 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 Fahrenheit, the increase in the ground average temperature global, above which the planet is going to enter a much more dangerous regime of climate change. What is not well known or talked about is, in fact, it's not even well known among scientists, I think, is that a parallel circumstance exists in the living world, the living part of the world. Earth is at or approaching right now a rate of 1,000 times above pre-human levels, and the rate is accelerating. Repeat, accelerating. Somewhere between 1,000 times and 10,000 times, Earth's natural ecosystems will reach the equivalent of the 2C global warming threshold and begin to truly disintegrate as half or more of the species pass quickly into extinction. We're in the situation of surgeons in an emergency room who slowed the bleeding of an accident victim to, say, 50%. And we as observers can say, congratulations, the patient will be dead by morning. There's a momentous moral decision confronting us here today. It can be put in the form of a question. What kind of a species, what kind of an entity are we to treat the rest of life so cheaply? What will future generations think of those now alive to make an irreversible decision of this magnitude in such ignorance and so carelessly. The 5 previous such mass extinctions, the last one about 65 million years ago that ended the age of reptiles, variously among them, starting from the end of the Permian, took 5 million to 40 million years to recover by evolution. Does any serious person really believe that we can just let the other 10 million species that exist on this planet or more drain away, and our descendants will somehow, you and yours to follow, and our descendants will somehow be smart enough to take over the planet and ride it like the crew of a spaceship? That later generations will somehow find the way to equilibrate the land, sea, and air in the biosphere, on which we absolutely depend in the absence of most of the natural biosphere that took 3.5 billion years to put together. Most, or many of us at least, here present, understand that only by taking global conservation to a new level can the hemorrhaging of species be brought down to anywhere near the original baseline rate, which in pre-human times was 1 species extinction per 1 million to 10 million, somewhere in that range, of species a year. Loss of natural habitat is the primary cause of biodiversity extinction. To remind you, ecosystems composed of species prescribed by genes, all of it. Only by the preservation of much more natural habitat than hitherto envisioned can extinction be brought close to a sustainable level, and at least give humanity time to put its act together in this continuing destruction of the natural world. The number of species that can persist in a habitat, I'll remind you, increases somewhere between the 3rd and 5th root of the area of the habitat, in most cases close to the 4th root. At the 4th root, a 90% loss in area, which is frequent in present-day practice and a common feature of many of the most species-rich places in the world, from Madagascar to New Caledonia to the Philippines and on. And there will be, therefore, even when we set off just that amount, an automatic drop over time to half the species or more. At the present time, about 15% of the global land surface and 3% of the global ocean surface are protected in nature reserves. That varies by 1 or 2 according to estimates, but this is the most authoritative I've given you, I believe authoritative. 15 protected on the global land surface, 3% on the global ocean surface. Not only will most of these reserves continue to suffer automatic diminishment of their faunas and floras unless each species in turn is attended to, but extinction will accelerate overall as the remaining unprotected wildlands and marine habitats, especially coral reefs, shrink due to human activity. The only way to save the rest of life, if we want to save the rest of life, and heaven to Betsy we do, the only way is to increase the area of protected and inviolable habitat around the world to a safe level. What is that safe level? My field is biogeography, and this is subjective, but I think it can be argued. I believe that all the signs of current trends in evolution, extinction and duration of species lives, all the signs show that a safe level can be managed with a stabilized global population of about 10 billion people, more about that in a moment, is at about half the Earth's land surface plus half the surface of the sea. Now, before you start making a list of why that can't be done, that half can't be set aside for the other 10 million or so species sharing the planet with us, let me explain to you why I believe it most certainly can be done if enough people wish to do it. Think of humanity in this century, if you will, as passing through a bottleneck of overpopulation and environmental destruction. At the other end, if we pass through safely, and if we take most of the rest of Earth's surviving life forms with us, human existence, and this is not blue sky, I believe it, human existence could be a paradise compared to today, and the long geological lifespan of our species, even a kind of immortality, could be ensured, again, if we, that is people everywhere, wish it to be so. The reason for using the metaphor of a bottleneck instead of a precipice, which is the usual metaphor, is that four unintended consequences of human behavior provide for the rest of life, so to speak, helping us to thread the bottleneck, find our way through the bottleneck. The first unintended consequence is the dramatic drop in fertility to at or below zero population growth. Whenever women gain a modicum of social and economic independence. Now, this is not just a liberal Harvard professor talking about women's rights, and so on, although I happen to be. But again, this is what is happening around the world. Population growth is slowing worldwide, and it's been predicted most recently by the United Nations Population Program, destined in the present trend to approach stability, and I would add maybe then begin to decline somewhere between 9.6 billion and 12.3 billion by the end of the century. This assumes, and I think reasonably assumes, that the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa are going to pass through the demographic transition and drop to lower fertility rates consistent with the rest of the world. The second unintended consequence I wish to call to your attention is, well, I don't need it because you know, but let's think about it, that's what this means for a half-Earth solution. The second unintended consequence is the growing abandonment of rural and mostly primitively agricultural economies by the implosion of people into cities, freeing land for both additional reserves and for better agriculture and the conservation of natural environments by restoration. It's worth noting also that the current daily production of food globally is 2,800 calories per person per day. I cite this with confidence because it is cited, for example, in the food issue of the National Geographic. And the National Geographic, I know from having written an article, does not let go of you until they check you, they check everybody that's ever written on the subject, and they worry about it. And this is certainly a good piece of news, if correct. 28 calories already, much more, in fine definition of what is consumed by an adult male at the present time. So the problem is therefore not really food production, but transport of food and the poor quality of the artisanal agriculture. We can fix that. The present day agriculture is still basically, around the world, Neolithic, and we could spend an entire session on that alone, with a lot of wriggle room. There are ways, particularly aided by the digital revolution, of greatly increasing, and dry land agriculture and so on, to immensely improve the output, at least enough to accommodate the coming 40% or so anticipated population growth. The third unintended consequence is the reduction of the human ecological footprint by the evolution of the economy itself. The ecological footprint, to remind you, is the amount of space required for all the needs of each person on average. Statements such that the planet, that we have heard, the planet can safely support only 2 to 3 billion people, and we're so far beyond that, it's not even worth considering. But statements like that overlook the circumstance that the global economy is evolving and during the digital and because of the digital revolution at a fast rate. And the trend is overwhelmingly toward manufacture of products that use less material and energy. In the modern economy, that is one of the necessary routes to the increase of productivity. They require these products less to use and repair. Information technology, I scarcely need to remind you, is improving at warp speed. The result is a shrinkage of the ecological footprint. There is no reason to believe that as we climb to this peak in population, that productivity is going to rise, and that it's going to arise in terms of what's called extensive economic growth as opposed to intensive. We are moving rapidly toward intensive growth. We very much need, that is, concentration on just what I said, the effectiveness and efficiency and the cost of the product. We very much need an analysis of that trend and its impact. If economists have thought of analyzing this effect and its meaning for the environment, instead of stumbling around in their fever swamp parameters of the early 21st century, I have not seen an effort like that. And since Nobel Prizes are given so swiftly and readily to economists, I say they should do so forthwith. The fourth unintended consequence is the easing of demand on the natural environment inherent in the evolutionary shift just mentioned from an extensive economy to an intensive economy, one that focuses, for example, in the manner of Moore's law, in innovation and improvements of products instead of acquisition of new and better projects, expanding physical development and promoting capital growth based on land acquisition. Humanity may well be shifting toward a non-growth economy. Just that has been recommended, foreseen and recommended by most of the national academies of science of the world. Focusing on a quality of life instead of capital and economic power as the premier measures of success. And I think that is one of the, not collateral, but certainly causative changes that should be encouraged or just celebrated, really, in connection with the whole issue of parks and space and land acreage and the saving of the living world. And this brings me finally then to the focal issue of the conference. Inevitably, biodiversity and ecosystem science, still pitifully neglected in the academy, in the universities, will move toward parity. I guarantee you this. That's going to move toward parity with molecular and cell biology and brain science among the biological disciplines. Now it is starving. Tomorrow it will be seen as the great scientific, technological, and intellectual challenge that it presents us. They will have equal challenges. They will be seen to have equal importance to our daily lives. And as this expansion occurs into, finally, the living part of the environment, and not shrugging just the physical part, national parks and other reserves are going to be logical centers for fundamental research. The increase in the number and the size of national parks, and parks with smaller political units, is everywhere something that really has to be promoted for the future of humanity. These parks are our ready-made laboratories in which the results have often been laid out so that we don't have to disturb them in any manner. They will also be among the best places to introduce students at all levels to science, pro-science, being pro-science. We already know that that's the case for parks and geology and earth chemistry and water system studies. Soon it will also be more obviously true for studies of the living environment. Students and teachers alike are going to have the advantage of immediate hands-on science at all levels, and where even at the most elementary level, all are soon caught up in making original discoveries of citizen science. After 42 years of teaching experience at Harvard, that's the one on the East Coast, I believe that natural ecosystems are by far the most open and effective way to enter science education and to give it that boost. And not coincidentally, to conclude, we need that knowledge now, desperately, to save the rest of life. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Wilson. I felt like I was back in class again. Let's talk about some of the interesting issues that you've raised. And I think one of them you alluded to when we got started was the attention focused in our society right now is on climate change, not biodiversity loss. And you spoke about this. Tell me what you think needs to be done to change that.
What obviously needs to be done is that we need more, not just larger parks and more of them, but we need them connected. There's a movement that is taking place in the conservation community globally. Here it is the Wilderness Society and the Wildlands Association, I hope I hadn't got the name wrong, that is promoting the idea not only of larger parks, but also of joining them to make corridors. And I think one of the things that we could accomplish in this country at the present time is what I like to call boxing America. We have already often discussed, and it's been mapped very well, Y2, Yukon to Yellowstone corridor. That can be extended to the Rockies, to the mountains of southern Arizona, to the Sierra Madre Occidental, and then on down. It can then be also cross the taiga, the great coniferous wilderness area, across through Canada. That could be achieved. And then down through areas that are surprisingly sparsely occupied by people to the Adirondacks, and continue on down the Appalachian to Appalachia to the end of that. And then we have a park, we have a corridor already mostly put together through the length of Florida, from the Everglades to Okefenokee. And I've been very actively concerned in what is building rapidly a corridor that goes from that, close to that, Tallahassee, all the way to Mississippi, Box America. And then as the climate changes, dries, heats, so on, that allows species of plants and animals to migrate, that is, to breed and expand their population and remain in existence. That should be a worldwide way of planning expansion of land.
So what would you see the role of the U.S. National Park Service then, sort of in that plan and in your plan to reach a 50% goal?
More, bigger, taking central place in America's strategic planning, right alongside defense.
Oh. Great. There's been a growing recognition of the potential of working landscapes to conserve biodiversity. Do working landscapes contribute to your acreage goals that you need to achieve the 50%?
I think it's not just a stupid, but a dangerous way of looking at it. Okay. I think those who believe in it can now applaud. But the thing is that what kind of landscapes have we got now? If they're not working landscapes, well, they're not working landscapes. Are they lazy landscapes? This is an indication of a wrong-headed and quite dangerous worldview that somehow our national parks, our park systems, our reserves should be evaluated in terms of their importance for humanity. And if you can't get some product out of them, without extinguishing birds, then at least you would be able to measure their value by the aesthetic and the psychological benefits that people have having them there. That's completely wrong. You've got to, we don't even know what's there for the most part to start with. We really need to have an ethic that recognizes the importance of the natural world in its own right, at least until such time we can begin to half understand it, where it came from and what it all means. This is unmitigated arrogance to speak of that. And I've noticed that people who've written most prominently on this worldview, journalists like Emma Maris, unfortunately the present science advisor of the Nature Conservancy, Peter Kariva, and others are pushing this, are also those with the least experience in studying ecosystems and species and other biodiversity. And I'm reminded, I'm sorry for the heat I'm putting into this, but this is something that should be countered immediately because it's dangerous. And I would like to quote in that end Humboldt, Alexander Humboldt, who had some kind of resistance of this sort 200 years ago. And he said, the most dangerous worldview is the worldview of those who have not viewed the world.
He viewed the world, didn't he? Humboldt, he went everywhere. That's fantastic. Does that mean then that we have to have areas sort of devoid of people to make this goal work for you? Protected areas devoid of people, without people living in them?
Oh, of course not. I think that's a misconception. It might be promoted by, may they soon count among the extinct species, the new conservationists, that, this means we're going to clear everybody out, and not let people in and so on. Not in the least. There are indigenous people. There are people who have occupied the areas of that might be included in the expanded parks, who get easements in their families, as was done for the Smoky Mountain, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, it is just that the land that is conserved in a way that the fauna and the flora at least is protected and allowed to evolve and maintain whatever equilibrium it had prior to occupation.
I have a question here from the audience. Do you believe classical natural history is on the decline? And if so, what can be done about it?
It's been on the decline ever since the molecular evolution, which was, of course, the golden age. Let me say that frankly. But I remember one day that my arch rival as assistant professors at Harvard in the 50s when Jim Watson came, and I remember the time I suggested that no ecologist had been thought of, to add to the faculty, and I said, well, so-and-so is over in this graduate school of design, might be given a courtesy or associate membership in this department, and Jim, who's a good friend of mine now, but at any rate, he said, are you out of your mind? And I said, what do you mean out of my mind? And he said, anybody that would suggest bringing an ecologist to a biology department must be out of their mind. Well, that was the attitude of so many when we saw the birth of the great developments in molecular, then cell, then developmental, then neurobiological or brain science. But now we have to understand that great intellectual challenges concerning, for example, the organization of ecosystems out of all that infinitude of biological specificity that occurs in the biodiversity. All that is one of the great challenges of modern science. And that was the point I'm trying to make, that we are going to see a rebirth then of what I like to call scientific natural history. And I want to see, furthermore, eventually a reinstatement of the logos, the ologies. I want to see at places like Berkeley and Harvard and so on, a return of herpetology and ichthyology and entomology and so on as full departments, as majors, in which the students enter to study the biodiversity and just bring in the armamentarium of modern biology to enrich their studies, but whose central interest is that group. I want to see people who are students and fellow professionals, biologists, who's in love with the group they have, that they're studying. They want to know everything about it, and they want to make discoveries based upon it. And that's what we need desperately, and that will reverse. I think that will happen. Maybe the ologies won't come back. They should. But we shouldn't be justifying studies on biodiversity by saying, oh, they add a lot to our understanding of evolutionary biology or developmental biology and so on. That's pathetic. That's a beggar's recommendation. We need to make vertebrate zoology and ornithology and so on equal in emphasis, say, to neurobiology.
Yeah, thank you. We're lucky here. We've managed to maintain and conserve those ology courses.
You're like one of these parks, big parks with a lot of what we call relic species, but now
present company excluded, right?
Yeah, but now we want to see them grow and flourish and speciate and come back.
There you go. Lineages you don't want to lose. That's right. So thinking about losing lineages, some scientists have advocated triage, or letting some species perish if the cost of conserving them would be better spent maximizing the benefits for more numbers of species. Do you think triage is necessary for conservation of biodiversity to be ultimately successful?
Wait a minute, would you repeat that? I didn't quite get
Okay,
the gist of it.
some scientists have advocated letting some species perish in order to put our best economic benefit by putting the funds into other species that we could triage.
That's ridiculous. I mean, that tends to come, I know you didn't say it as your opinion, but the idea that, that we can have some knuckleheaded engineer of biology come in and look over the endangered species and said, well, we're just going to have to let that one go. We can't spend $1 million to bring back that warbler or so on, as we have done under the Endangered Species Act. But we can bring them back. It's not that expensive. And it also is synergistic as you start to implement larger reserves, better knowledge, the techniques generally of sustaining ecosystems. This will become less expensive, just like everything else. But this idea that you just mentioned, that we have a triage, is that some species are just destined to die. Their time has come. That's basically it. So why should we be spending taxpayers' dollars trying to save some species that's going to die anyway? That is absolute nonsense. The reason is that a species becomes rare and extinct, usually because its support system in the natural environment or a part of a natural environment is taken away, or species have been allowed to come in that are invasive, that are pressing it out. Members of the species are not old and senile and decrepit, but quite the contrary. The young there are just as vital and reproductive and so on, unless they get too small, so there's too much inbreeding, but even that you can fix it. And that's it. Okay, I'll just sum it up because we're running out of time. Save them all.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some questions I've gotten online about curiosity and engaging people in our parks. How can the national parks best shape biological curiosity for future generations of Americans?
Well, that's precisely relevant to what we're here for at this meeting. We're talking about the idea that it seems to me to be gaining momentum, that without undue disturbance, we can have research and educational centers within a park. When students are brought in contact in the rich environment which they are innately prone to be interested in to start with, and allowed to learn and also do research of their own very promptly, so helping in the search of a rare species, helping identify or collect forms for identification and so on, they're engaged and it's much more likely to move directly in to science.
So in your own life, you've spoken about how your childhood curiosity drove you as a biologist. Are national parks and wilderness necessary to inspire that awe of nature? Can we find it in smaller places?
Just woods. I grew up substantially in the sight of what we hope to be, those of us who've been promoting it and hoping to see it reality. I grew up in that area of the richest part of the United States per unit area, and delighted to collect all sorts of insects, including butterflies. When I was a little kid, I was called by my colleagues Bugs Wilson. And then I went into a snake phase. 40 species of snakes. in the central Gulf Plain. And I was catching them. I even took a strike by a rattlesnake on my left finger, and I was then called Snake Wilson.
How'd your parents feel about that?
I lucked out by having parents who didn't question me too closely when I went out the door. And we could have a whole nother hour on the best way to raise children and vis-a-vis, the natural world and letting kids explore and find things on their own.
Yeah.
It's a very stimulating kind of environment for kids.
It is. And we are starting to come to the end of our time together. Before we let you leave the stage, I wanted to present something to you. You haven't been to Berkeley for a while, and I'm sure you don't have one of these. You need a cow hat.
Wonderful.
This one doesn't have a bear on it, but it has a pine tree, and I think you'll be able to use that when you're out next time in Madagascar.
I will.
Very good. Thank you so much, Professor Wilson.